I'm a 30-year-old man and my wife, who's 27, and I have been married for 4 years. Looking back, we realize we might have married young, but it felt right at the time. We dated for a little over a year before deciding we were meant to be. But recent events have me questioning if we truly were. I've got a good job. My brothers and I started a jewelry business from scratch, and it's doing well. Working with family can be tough, but for us, it's been a breeze. We're close and rarely argue. My wife, on the other hand, runs a cozy cafe. It's the kind of place where you can enjoy a good book with coffee and pastries, and it reflects her personality perfectly. She's a huge book lover. Honestly, I never understood people who made reading their whole identity until I met her. She loves her cafe, and I've tried to support her by helping with rent since the place is in a nice part of town. The business is doing well now, especially without the rent burden. Around March, my wife started talking about a new customer who'd been showing up at the cafe. She described him as very handsome, which wasn't a big deal since we've always been able to talk about other people's looks without any drama. But this time the way she talked about him was different. She went on about how he seemed like the hero in the romance novels she devours, the type of cheesy stories with tall, dark, mysterious men who sweep women off their feet. She mentioned he was from Serbia, used to work as a car dealer, and had come to the US for a fresh start. Apparently, he was tall, blonde, well-dressed, and spoke with a strong accent. She said he was a fan of Wild West stories and The Lord of the Rings, and she'd even recommended a few books to him. Honestly, I was trying to brush off her enthusiasm, but it was hard not to notice that she was describing him with way too much admiration. It seemed almost like she was idealizing him, which started to bother me. Eventually, Ivan, as she later told me his name, became just another customer, or so I thought. She didn't bring him up as often, which made me feel a bit more at ease. I even stopped by the cafe one afternoon and spotted him. He matched her description exactly, and yeah, he was a handsome guy. But I brushed it off and figured it was nothing. Then things got strange. One night, my wife came home with a silly grin on her face. When I asked her what was up, she told me Ivan had walked her home, and they'd talked about books on the way. Apparently, he'd asked her out on a date, but she turned him down, saying she was married. According to her, he was very apologetic, even held her hand before saying goodnight. She said it felt like something out of a book. That line hit me hard. It felt like she was romanticizing the whole thing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was genuinely excited by it all. A week later, she came home with a bouquet of flowers. When I asked about it, she casually explained that Ivan had bought them for her, as a friendly gesture, saying she worked hard and deserved a little cheer. I pressed her, asking if she thought Ivan might have feelings for her. She admitted he probably did, but insisted the flowers were just a friendly thing. I found that hard to believe. Most guys don't buy flowers for a married woman who's turned them down. I was beginning to see Ivan's game clearly, but she seemed oblivious, or maybe just pretended to be. 2 days after the flower incident, she came home later than usual without mentioning she'd be out. I called her a couple of times with no response, but she eventually showed up, looking more cheerful than ever. The first thing she said was, "You won't believe the evening I had." She then went into detail about how she'd shown Ivan a local museum and treated him to American pizza, something he'd never tried before. They'd walked, talked, and enjoyed the evening together. When she was done, I asked her directly, "Are you attracted to Ivan?" She looked shocked and defensive, saying of course not, insisting she was just helping a new friend settle in. She argued that it was all innocent, that I was just being insecure, and that I had nothing to worry about. I tried to stay calm, but I told her I didn't want her spending time with him outside of the cafe anymore. She could interact with him as a customer, but that was it. She accused me of being insecure and jealous, and we ended up in a huge fight that left me on the couch that night. But at least after that, I stopped hearing much about Ivan. For a while, things settled down. She'd come home at her usual time, and there was no more talk of museums or friendly flowers. I thought that was the end of it. Then one afternoon, I decided to drop by the cafe again. To my surprise, my wife wasn't there. I didn't think much of it at first. I figured she might be out running an errand. But as I was leaving, I saw her and Ivan coming up the street, arm in arm, laughing together. Seeing that was like a punch to the gut. I managed to hold it together and watch them go back inside, then I left. I spent the rest of the day wrestling with what I'd seen, trying to make sense of it. When she came home later, I casually asked how her day was, and she described a completely normal day with no mention of Ivan or any walk with him. That's when I knew something was up. So, here's where I'm at. Should I confront her now, or try to dig up more information first? Part of me feels like if I confront her, she'll just deny everything, and I'll never get the full truth. I decided to find out the truth, no matter how hard it was going to be. I've never liked the idea of going through someone else's phone, it feels wrong. But at this point, I had to know what was really going on. So, one night when she was asleep, I picked up her phone. There, in a messaging app, I found a long conversation with Ivan. I exported it all to my phone to read later, deleting any trace of what I'd done. The conversation was everything I feared. They'd been talking constantly, and the messages weren't just friendly chats. They were filled with flirty comments and inside jokes. I found a part where they were talking about a book my wife had recommended. Here's the part that gutted me. Ivan, the characters remind me of us, don't they? Clarice, not her real name, yes, totally. The mysterious guy and the artsy girl torn between him and her boyfriend. Ivan, and all those steamy scenes. It's like reading about us. Clarice, it's so wrong, but that's what makes it so exciting. I read the whole thing, feeling my stomach turn. She even joked about how the boyfriend was her husband, as if I were some joke between them. The thrill she got from sneaking around was clear in every word. She was living out some fantasy and didn't even care how much it would hurt me. I felt humiliated, like she'd been laughing at me behind my back. It was 2 a.m. by the time I finished reading, and I couldn't be in the same house as her. I left for a long walk, barely noticing the time pass. By the time I got back, it was just after 3 a.m. and she was still asleep. She had no idea I knew, which was almost worse. She looked so peaceful while I was a mess inside. The next day, I acted like everything was fine. But I knew the truth now, and it gave me a strange kind of power. I wanted to catch her in more lies to see how far she'd go. That evening, I casually asked her again about her day. She gave me the same old story with no mention of Ivan. I could see it now, every little lie she told me. It was almost a game to her. I started making plans. First, I needed solid proof of her infidelity. So, the next time I had a chance, I took a video of her messages with Ivan. I recorded the screen as it scrolled through their chats, capturing all the parts where she joked about us and steamy scenes. I wanted undeniable evidence to take into a divorce. I was done playing along with her fantasy. With everything in place, I found a good lawyer. I wanted to make sure I had the best defense when it came time to split up our assets. My wife's cafe was only profitable because I'd helped her financially, and I wasn't about to let her take more of my money now. I'd given her a chance, and she'd taken advantage of it. I was ready to confront her at any moment, but I decided to hold back a little longer and let her think she was still in control. A few days later, she went off to work, and I parked nearby waiting. When the process server walked into her cafe and handed her the divorce papers in front of everyone, I felt a sense of justice. I watched her face fall, and when she looked around, I was gone. That night, she came home devastated. She kept asking me if it was because of Ivan, saying it was nothing serious, just a silly friendship. She was crying, begging, trying to convince me that I was overreacting, but I stayed calm. I told her I'd seen her and Ivan walking arm in arm that day, and I'd had enough. I didn't reveal everything I knew. I wanted her to keep wondering how much I'd uncovered. Her reaction was predictable. First, she tried begging, then she tried to tell me I was overreacting, and finally she got defensive. She accused me of being jealous, insecure, and unreasonable. She kept repeating that nothing happened, but I just told her to leave. In court, things went exactly as I'd hoped. My lawyer made sure her infidelity was front and center. We even tracked some expenses she'd made from our joint account that aligned with their text messages, little gifts and outings she'd paid for. It was clear she'd been using our money to spoil Ivan. My lawyer painted her as a gold digger who had betrayed me while I'd helped her build a business. She tried to defend herself, but the evidence was overwhelming. In the end, I kept the house, my car, and my assets. There would be no alimony, and she had to leave with far less than she'd hoped for. The judge saw right through her. After the divorce, I felt a mix of relief and lingering anger. Clarice walked away with almost nothing, and I didn't have to pay alimony, which was satisfying. But I wasn't quite done. I still wanted Ivan to feel the consequences of his part in this. One day, as he left the cafe, I followed him around the corner. I introduced myself, and before he could say a word, I hit him square in the jaw. He looked stunned, blood trickling from his lip as he scrambled to his feet and walked away, saying nothing. It wasn't much, but it gave me a little closure. Then there was the matter of the cafe rent. The rent was due again, and she had no way to cover it without my help. She called, begging me to assist her, just this one time, but I told her to sell her car if she needed cash and hung up. She sold it, only to call me afterward, furious. She called me every name she could think of, accusing me of being evil. I reminded her that she'd laughed behind my back and told her this was the cost. She went silent. Now I'm moving forward with my life. There's a strange peace in knowing I did everything I could and ended things on my terms. The betrayal hurt, but I'm in a better place, newly single and ready to start fresh. Thanks to everyone who offered support during all this, it meant a lot to know people understood. I'm ready to put all of this behind me and live a life that's honest and free of deception. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to catch our next video. Thanks for tuning in.